Okay. We are live. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get started in about a minute or so, just to give people time to join. But thank you so much for being with us. As we wait, if you want to let us know in the comments from whatever platform you're watching from, where you are watching from. So be it from YouTube, Facebook, where in the world are you joining us from? And again, we're going to take about a minute, maybe a minute and a half, just to give folks a chance to join us. See someone from Charleston, South Carolina. Welcome. And again, if you're just joining, welcome. We got Harrisonburg, Virginia, of course. The deep recesses of Sadie Hartzler Library at EMU. Welcome. Madison, Wisconsin, Mobile, Alabama. Welcome, welcome. If you're just joining us, we are taking a little bit of time to get acquainted in the comments, giving folks some time to join us. We have someone from Tamarack, Florida. Welcome. See folks rolling in. Lawrence, Kansas, truly all over the country. It's great to see you here for this really important topic. Waterbury, Connecticut, welcome. Okay, all right. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you again so much for joining us for this exciting topic, gun violence, restorative justice, and community healing. I'm Des Moines Wesley. I'm the Associate Director for the Zare Institute for Restorative Justice, which is a program of Eastern Mennonite University Center for Justice and Peace Building. It is so great to see you all. I'm so happy to be inviting you into this conversation, where we'll be joined by Dr. Bhagat, Dr. T. Pettiford-Wates, Olufemi Shepsu, Kiran Bhagat, and Toya Fernandez. I had the pleasure of joining some of these folks in a class at this year's Summer Peace Building Institute on this very topic. And so I'm so glad to be sharing it with the broader Zare Institute community. A little bit for today. So I'll be introducing our first two hosts, Dr. Bhagat and Dr. T. There will be a presentation by each one of our panelists, and then we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. And then right at the end, I'll come back on and have a few announcements for you, and then let you go. So again, thank you so much for joining. And it is my honor and pleasure to first introduce Dr. B, Dr. Bhagat, and Dr. T. So welcome. Hello. So first up, Dr. Bhagat is an educator, peacemaker, and community healer. He is a national leader in restorative justice, specializing in collective healing circles for gun violence trauma. Dr. Ram offers classes, drum circles, edu concerts, seminars, talks, and workshops for groups of all ages and backgrounds across the United States and around the world. He is the founder and director of the nonprofit community-based org Drums No Guns Foundation, based in Richmond, Virginia, whose mission is to spread peace, health, and harmony through yoga, mindfulness, therapeutic drumming, and restorative justice. Thank you, Dr. B, for being here.
Yeah, thank you. So good to see you again.
So good to see you. And we have Dr. T, who is a playwright, director, actor, poet, writer, scholar, activist, and teacher. She devises plays and facilitates workshops on deconstructing Eurocentric models of arts education all over the US, using her internationally renowned methodology, ritual poetic drama. Dr. T is the founder and artistic director of the Conciliation Project, a nonprofit social justice theater company whose mission is to promote, through active and challenging dramatic work, open and honest dialogue about racism and oppression in America in order to repair its damaging legacy. Thank you, Dr. T, for being here.
Devontae, thank you. Thank you for the invite. And it's nice to see you again.
It's so good to see you. So as I said, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. B and Dr. T to get us started, and they're going to introduce each one of our panelists. As you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the comment sections, again, from wherever you're watching, if you're watching in the StreamYard platform or from YouTube or from Facebook, and we will see them all in one place. And then we'll have a bit of a discussion after presentations. So again, Dr. B, Dr. T, I turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So we'll start off by just talking about the class that we have developed over the years and what we offered last summer at the Summer Peace Building Institute. Dr. T and I have been working together for at least a decade on various issues around community healing, trauma and resilience, and we have a particular interest in gun violence and addressing the root causes of gun violence through the arts, through culture, through public health, education, and so forth. So we came to the development of this class, as I said, by doing different workshops in our specific areas. And what we came up with was how to intersect gun violence, which we consider to be a national epidemic, or what we call a wicked problem. Having had personal experience with gun violence ourselves, and then seeing the impact that it has on our communities, on people that we know, and then on the nation as a whole. And both of us have been deeply involved in the restorative justice movement, especially focusing on Afro-Indigenous perspectives, Afro-Indigenous rituals, Afro-Indigenous circle practices. So we blended those two concerns of ours and interests of ours together to formulate this class on gun violence and restorative justice. We wanted to do more than just focus on the problem, though. We wanted to look at different things that we've been doing in our work through the years and to synthesize them into a process or like a pedagogy that we could put into action. And that's how we came up with the idea of like, how do we combine this tremendous problem, this enormous problem around gun violence and the emergence and evolution of restorative justice practices and focus it towards community healing. Communities of all kinds, especially communities that are disproportionately affected by gun violence. And that's how we came up with the class. And our class was set up to be a generative process where we provided structure and processes and experiences and activities and exercises, but it was really designed to bring in voices of content experts and to also tap into the collective wisdom of the participants in the course to formulate strategies on how to address gun violence using restorative justice practices. And so the participants in the class, they were directly involved in coming up with, analyzing, investigating, interrogating different aspects of these issues, and then coming up with solutions or coming up with
strategies
that they could implement in their own communities. So I'm going to pass it over to Dr. T.
Hey, all right. So I come to the work. First of all, I want to say using the arts, the creative arts. Creative arts are generative, not destructive. At least that's the intent of the art. And in this work, we, Dr. B and I, want art as an intervention in the cycles cycles of violence, the cycles of racism and destruction, things that break communities down rather than build communities up. And our purpose is about community building, because without one another, we cannot, and we cannot proceed, we cannot progress. And it is that is indigenous to African culture, the African cultural continuum. And one of the things that our workshops always generate, and where we want to put the focus, is on the transformative power of story. Our own stories, the stories of the participants in the practice. Dr. B said something about we're creating this pedagogy, and yes, it's true that we are, but pedagogy that is not practiced is dead. It's nothing. It doesn't do anything. So we're about full body immersion, full body immersion in the practice. And it is rooted in the indigenous practices of the African cultural continuum. And that's where my methodology is birthed out of, the methodology of ritual poetic drama, because we need mind, body, and spirit. We need mind, body, and spirit, and all of those things need to be addressed. I like to say my muse, my inspiration, is a man by the name of James Baldwin, who I believe was a prophet and was prophesying into the future with his work. And one of the things that he said, which is an anchor for me, is that a story is impelled by the necessity to reveal itself. And that means that a story can have nothing to hide, at least not intentionally. That there is no resolution to a story, that the aim of the story is revelation in what we make of the questions with which the story leaves us. And that is the center of storytelling, of the transformative power of our stories. Each time we do this work, I recognize more and more intersections in my own life where gun violence had a significant effect, where the trauma of that has been so buried that I even forgot that I had the experience. And that's and we've found very powerful evidence in allowing people to speak to their own experiences and problematize together and strategize with what we can do artistically to create a beloved community whereby we are responsible one to another, et cetera, et cetera. Malcolm X, another one of my heroes, has a quote about which I attach to community. He says something about the quote is, "Sometimes a fruit falls from a tree and rolls so far away from its roots that it is no longer of the tree. The hard fall and the long journey bruises the fruit so much that it totally changes it. It's the same way for some of our people. This is why some can't be awakened regardless of how much truth you present to them. This journey has totally brainwashed them to such a degree that they are no longer part of the original tree." The idea of disconnection from your roots, that you need your roots, you need your story, you need the connection to your story and your cultural continuum to be healthy, to heal, to bring healing, not only to yourself as the individual, but to the community that you belong to. So the mission of the Conciliation Project, by the way, it is conciliation and not reconciliation. And the reason for that being that there are many, and I can just speak in terms of Black and white. Our community on this continent has never been together, so you can't reconcile or come together if you've never come together in the first place. And so we're about looking at that. We're about radical transparency and truth telling as we address the issues around our community. And specifically, our workshop was around violence and gun violence. So I think I don't want to go over my time, because I know we have limited time and we have many brilliant thoughts and things that others want to share with you. So I want to give everybody equal opportunity. We'll talk. Well, if you have any questions.
Yeah, just to make that transition, we presented our pedagogy. We call it PIA, Pedagogy in Action. We presented our framework at the National Conference for Community and Restorative Justice several times, and at other seminars, webinars, conventions. And I also want to mention that Dr. T, through her work with the Conciliation Project, has devised plays that deal with this issue in particular, gun violence, called Locked and Loaded. I don't remember the byline off the top of my head, T.
Story in Parts and Pieces.
Story in Parts and Pieces. And then also other devised plays that deconstruct the Eurocentric model of culture, society, justice, plays such as Uncle Tom Deconstructed,
Stolen Land, Border Crossings, Genocide Trail, A Holocaust Unspoken,
Prison Industrial Complex,
White-splaining,
Global Sexism.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then Drums No Guns. We produce concerts, edu-concerts. And edu-concert is where we implement this theory of change using entertainment and education in a public health context to promote certain ideas that are developed in conjunction with young people. And then we present it in a way where their voices are amplified, specifically using drumming, dance, drama, and disruptive design. Mm-hmm. So like Dr. T said, it's an embodiment. It's an embodied experience. It taps into the theory of somatic liberation, the theory and practice of somatic liberation, and it's a healing. It's a transformative process. So we have 3 guests with us today. One of our guests is a social worker, school social worker at a middle school in Richmond, Virginia, where we have designed and developed a demonstration project called Massive Resilience Project. And through this project, we use rites of passage, among other elements like yoga and mindfulness, restorative justice, urban gardening, to provide a laboratory for our young people to experiment with ways to generate social change in their own community. So at this time, we'd like to invite Brother Olufemi Shepsu to talk about the work that we do using culture as a methodology in gun violence prevention.
No doubt about it. Simadasi Paul, thank you for allowing me to be on this platform today. Again, I'm Olufemi Shepsu. I'm a school social worker here at the mighty MLK Middle School here, straight out of the East End in Richmond, Virginia. We're in one of the poor neighborhoods of the city. We service 5 housing projects here at MLK. And, we're in the middle of a food desert here in the East End. And pretty much like a lot of the urban neighborhoods that you'll see from Richmond, Detroit, Norfolk, all around the country share similar designs. as to how they have been put together. So one of the things that we're doing here to combat gun violence is that we would develop a rite of passage program for the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students, male and females, called Young Kings and Queens in Action. And through the rites of passage process, we are restoring order and balance and culture. Because back home in Africa, before we were taken away, typically when youth reached the age of 12, 13 years of age, they were taken out of their families or in their tribal or ethnic communities, and they were taken out in the bush for about 6 months to a year, and they would go through various processes, spiritual, cognitive, and physical challenges that would teach you how to be a man or a woman. And then once you return back to your particular family or group, then there will be a rite or rituals that would take place with your families that would have a place for you within the family and that particular ethnic or tribal group. So again, that process is ancient, it's African, and unfortunately that was disrupted. And those of you who saw on Roots with Kuta Kinte, when he was captured, he was out on one of his challenges for his rite of passage training. Okay, if any of you remember that or seen that. So that's what we're trying to do here in Richmond to combat the neighborhood violence, because in Richmond, neighborhood beefs are very serious. Creighton Court versus Fairfield Court versus Rainbow. So there are a lot of these different community dynamics that get involved. And gunplay is a very real part of the reality of our children. Being in these neighborhoods, it's not uncommon. Here in the school, we can hear gunshots in our schools at times. The school was on lockdown 2 weeks ago. There was a shooting on the corner, not even a block away from MLK, and a brother was shot and killed right there on the corner of Fairmont Avenue and Mosby Street, right on the corner from the school, maybe 2 weeks ago. We're talking to the children inside of our group here at Young Kings and Queens, and they're telling you very vivid and graphic commentary about bullets being coming through their windows, seeing dead bodies, or having family or friends that have been shot and killed or murdered, all right there in front of them, or again at some part of Richmond where they have extended family members being shot and killed, that type of thing. So that's a reality that we're dealing with here in our building. And before I move on, I want to briefly say this. We've got to look at gun violence in America from a historical perspective. And I don't take a look at it as something that's recent. I mean, we look at gun violence, it goes all the way back to how this country was founded and by the so-called settlers as they were marching across the United States and using guns to decimate the indigenous population. That's something that's not often talked about, but that is definitely a root cause of the violence that America has encountered from an institutional historical perspective. But as we're looking at African Americans in America, the most recent traumatic event with gun violence that really introduced this current set of circumstances of Black people has been the crack cocaine epidemic. They probably started in the United States, I'll probably say the mid 80s, all throughout the 90s. And I'm 59 years of age, born and raised here in Richmond. And I don't remember a time from the early 1970s until the mid 80s where I had lost any classmates or any families or any friends due to gun violence. Came out of high school in 1985. We had close to 400 kids in my graduating class, and only one student had lost their lives, and that was in 1984. A good friend of mine, Anthony Rouse, was killed in a car accident on Christmas Eve, 1984. But there wasn't any like people getting shot or killed or hurt. But when the crack cocaine dropped in Richmond in the late 80s, then there we saw a whole culture coming in of competition, drug use, and all the drug culture that permeated the city. And some years in the 90s, we had close to 400 people that were shot and killed. And now from that, do we now have the government response was the crime bill, I believe 1994, that now put a policy in place that if people had a few vials of crack cocaine on them, then the mandatory sentencing guidelines came in. So now you're seeing thousands of black men now for a couple of vials of crack now being put in jail for 17, 20, 25, 26, 27 years. Okay. And the crack cocaine was a multi-layered problem because it attacked our families on a very broad and wide scale. Now we have men, women being locked up, being shot and killed, children going into foster care because the families can't take care of them, witnessing the trauma of seeing someone's brains blown out right in front of you at the neighborhood, or someone's house being shot up, or threats of violence being made on a constant basis. And then now we're looking at an industry, the hip hop industry in the late 80s, now being influenced by gangster rap, by the gangster thug life image that was now being perpetrated by hip hop artists. And now a whole industry now is now sucked and tied into gun violence. As we can see, people, that this is a multi-level problem that's going to require multi-level solutions to be able to deal with it. Because now gun violence is institutionalized in neighborhoods. Children are used to seeing it on a daily basis. The hip-hop music and the trap music, the trap rap, that's all they're talking about, is busting the cap in the blank's ass. Okay? Constant. It's constant. And so now we have this culture that's been put in place, and how it pertains to black people in particular. I really take this to heart, that these images of thug life, images of the gangster movement, you see it on TV. We see television series based off of drugs, based off these images of black people. And these images are now being shown all over the world. So now the typical image that pops into somebody's mind of a black man, whether they're in America, whether they're in Lisbon, whether they're in the UK or South Africa, is of a thug, a gangster. So this is a lot that we got to deal with. And being 59 years of age, I kind of see this thing kind of spiral out of control. So when we're looking at gun violence, we got to look at it from a historical perspective. We got to see it being intertwined in these systems that are so entrenched in our families and our children. And now we've got to be able to now do what? Take control over these systems. Let our people know, especially black people, hey, we're not thugs. We're not hoodlums. All right. We got to restore the primacy of our men and our women in our communities, so that we can be a whole, sane, and healthy people again. And start having open conversations about crack cocaine and what that did to us. And with black people, we don't talk about crack. We reacted to it, but there was never any real progressive conversations on what crack cocaine did to us and the racialized responses for the federal government. That crime bill was insidious.
Let's
now we look at, and last one, just the last thing I want to say. But now we can look and see that the opioid pandemic is out of control, but I don't see any crime bills for opioids.
Let's pause right there. Bring Kieran in to talk about how to restore the practices, support the work that we're doing at MLK specifically, and in our communities in general. And then for people who are thinking about questions, like Demoite said earlier, we want to invite you to write your questions down so that Shepsu and Dr. T and I can address any questions that you might have at this point. So we're going to bring Kieran Bhagat into the conversation.
Peace and blessings, family. Thank you for having us. I'm happy to be here. My name is Bhagat, and I serve as the project manager for the Massive Resilience Initiative at MLK Middle School through Drums No Guns Foundation. I'm also a healing artist, a circle keeper, and therapeutic floral culture practitioner. I work with flowers and foodways, rhythm, and embodiment as pathways for restoration. And my work sits at the crossroads of art, healing, and liberation. I'm helping young people and adults reconnect with their breath, their body, and the earth as sources of wisdom and safety. Um, when I think about restorative justice, I don't just think about restorative justice as I don't think about it as a system or a framework. I feel it somatically in my body. I feel it as rhythm, as relationship, as remembering, and it's the slow practice of returning to right relationship after disconnection, after harm, both with ourselves and with one another. And I mean, when we talk about gun violence, um, I want to be clear. To me, it's not just about weapons, it's about wounds. It's a manifestation of unaddressed grief, um, economic abandonment, and historical trauma that lives in the nervous system of our communities, that lives in, um, that lives in our bodies. And many of our young people are not just witnesses to violence. They're carrying its echoes in their bodies and behaviors. And until we address those root causes through belonging, through purpose, through rhythm and self-regulation, we'll continue to see cycles of harm repeating themselves. And that's why restorative justice is essential to our work at Drums No Guns, because excuse me, because we can talk about peace. We have to talk about what the body has survived. And before we can ask for accountability, we have to make space for the nervous system to feel safety again, to feel safe in our bodies, to feel safe in the environment. um, in our circles, we start with the body. um, I like to invite that embodiment practice, that invitation um, to just notice the body. We breathe together, we ask, where do you feel it, where does it live in our body? And we have that opportunity to really just listen to what the body is trying to say beneath the words, because healing doesn't begin with explanation. Um, it begins with the sensation, with the feeling. It begins with the body remembering it's safe to be here. It's safe um, to breathe here, to live here. And at MLK Middle School, which is one of our model schools that we've been inviting this work in, restorative justice takes on many shapes. We've been offering a 30-second mindful moment broadcast each morning to ground the entire school in breath. And then we have the Sankofa Mindfulness Room where students and teachers, staff can rest and regulate. It's a space of sanctuary. And then restorative circles that bring youth, educators, and families together, not to punish or not to point the finger, but to really practice presence. And every one of those moments is really an act of resistance against a culture of disconnection that violence creates. And I think because our work is deeply cultural, we had the opportunity to lean into rhythm and ritual as medicine. Drumming, call and response, song. And these aren't just creative resources. They're ancestral technologies that help our bodies to remember community, that help our bodies to remember connection, interconnection, connectedness with one another. They return us to the original rhythm of belonging. And I guess I'll end with, or just conclude with, what I love about, or what resonates with me most about restorative justice is that it moves at the pace of the body. It invites us into slowness. It invites us into relationship, into breath, coming back to our breath as that first line of defense of safety. It doesn't rush healing. It really invites truth and accountability to just walk side by side alongside each other. It teaches that peace isn't a policy, it's a practice of presence. So when I say restorative justice supports our work at Drums No Guns, I really mean it literally keeps us human. It keeps us whole. It helps us turn pain into practice, and practice into healing, and healing into liberation, and liberation into medicine. And because liberation to me isn't abstract, it's what happens when a room full of people takes a collective breath and remembers that peace is still possible. I think I still hold that in my body. I still I hold that remembrance in my consciousness for not only myself but for the generations that will come after me. So if it's all right, I like to just close with that breath, inviting you all, or just inviting us to take one together if that feels supportive for you. And just simply just noticing the breath, breathing in through the nose, this very element that we rarely think about, that keeps us alive, that keeps us connected, that pulls us back into purpose. And then I'm just breathing out through the mouth, perhaps with an audible sigh or whatever natural sound leaves the body. And that's what restoration feels like. That's what community healing sounds like: a breath, a shared exhale, a collective rhythm, and a reminder that even the aftermath of violence, life still has a pulse, has a heartbeat. And I'm complete.
Thank you,
For
Kieran.
listening to
Appreciate
me.
you. So we'd like to invite Toya Fernandez to talk about the benefit of this approach based on her firsthand experience taking the Gun Violence Restorative Justice and Community Healing class at SPI this past summer. Welcome, Toya.
Hey everyone. Thank you, Karen, for that breath. I needed it. I definitely feel a little nervous right now because I'm in a space with giants, and I'm just so grateful and so honored. For folks who don't know me, my name is Latoya Fernandez. I'm a restorative justice practitioner, educator, community healer, going on year 15 in the practice, leading dialogues, reconciliation processes across schools, communities, the justice system. A founder of Beyond Circles, which is a restorative practices community space and used bookstore in Connecticut. And I am currently a graduate student at Eastern Mennonite University, and really excited about that. My work really centers on decolonizing restorative practices and reclaiming African rooted healing traditions, which I feel are essential tools for community transformation, and which is why I've resonated so deeply with Dr. B and Dr. T's course this summer. And out of that, and I'll talk a little bit about what birthed from that in a moment. Um, but wanted to really just talk about my experience coming forward as someone who grew up in a community where there was a lot of gun violence, and had the experience of seeing two different approaches to to behavior. So I have a brother who's taller than me. I'm 4'11". My brother is about 6'4". I'm light complected. I'm light skinned. My brother is more brown skinned than me. And we're only about a year and a half apart, just under 2 years apart. We were in the same schools growing up, and we had the same behaviors. We were growing up in the same kind of volatile community and a lot of violence in our household as well. And so we were at school getting in fights and just, really struggling with how to, really struggling with regulation, and struggling with being able to articulate our feelings and our needs to people. And also, violence felt normal. We were watching it in movies, we were hearing it in music. That was during the 90s when all of that was starting to really bubble up. And so it's interesting because we were in school and both getting in trouble for the same things. What was interesting about that was we got dealt with two different ways. You know, One teacher pulled me aside and said, you have a lot of potential, Latoya, and we want to support you in your journey. And we want to teach you how to articulate your feelings. And we want to give you some restorative approaches to handling conflict. And so it's interesting. And then my brother in the exact same school was getting suspended and then eventually expelled and kicked out of the school district. He went on to be kicked out of two other school districts. Here we go, fast forward 2025, and my brother is incarcerated right now in federal prison, over gun violence. And it's interesting because now he's in prison taking restorative justice classes and workshops, and he's able to start to reconcile with himself. But when we have these conversations, one of the things he says is, man, if someone had just took me, under their wing and said I had potential and that I wasn't as bad as my worst mistake, and that I could learn a different way to process my feelings and the things that I was going through, I wouldn't have labeled myself a troubled kid and just a bad kid. I wouldn't have resorted to that. And so I think the benefit of this work, is just, it can be completely life changing. Our lives went down two totally different paths because someone handled me with restoration, and he was handled with criminalization. And so going through the process this summer, I realized, number one, I had not processed my own trauma from all the gun violence. As a Black woman in America, not only is it been labeled as unacceptable to take breaks to process trauma and heal, but you're also given the responsibility of leading communities, having to step in and fill in roles for men who are absent because of structural racism and mass incarceration and gun violence. And so by being someone who had to carry that, who was a co parent and raising my brothers, a community leader and healer, carrying my community on my shoulders from a very young age, I hadn't. I hadn't been able to stop and process the gun violence. I wasn't able to stop and process how I took the city bus to go get my hair done in Hartford with one of my friends in the community. And then that night when I went to prom, I found out that same brother was shot and killed at that same block we both just took the bus to hours before that. I wasn't able to process that one of my neighborhood friends who got pulled over by the police while he was walking to the store was pulling out his ID, and the police thought he was pulling out a gun and shot and killed him at 14. And so all of these things continued to happen throughout my childhood, my young adulthood. My brother's best friend committed suicide by using a gun. And so I just kept going. I had to keep going. I had to keep surviving. And so when I got into that space, and this is why it's so important to have decolonized restorative practices spaces led by Black practitioners who lift up Afro-Indigenous wisdom, because the space was safe enough for me as a Black woman to heal, to release. I cried in agony in that class, in a way that I haven't cried in front of anyone. I don't think anyone has ever seen me cry like that. But that space was so safe. Dr. B and Dr. T curated such an intimate, safe space. I was able to let that out from the deep wounds, as Sister Kiran said, deep wounds from my soul. I was able to journal and write about those things that I hadn't processed, the trauma I hadn't processed. And I was able to infuse those experiences into art, the theater aspect of it, being able to act some of that stuff out. And what was so beautiful, what it was is I'm a hip hop artist. I love theater. That was my first passion. But because of structural racism, I said, well, I got to be an educator and an activist. And I had to kind of put the arts to the side. And I felt like Dr. T and Dr. B gave me an opportunity to tap back into that child who loves art, who loves theater, who loves poetry. And I got to do that. And it was just so liberating. It transformed me as a practitioner. And truth be told, was one of the main reasons I decided to go to Eastern Mennonite University. And, as a result of the healing that I experienced, because see, here's the thing about healing in that way with your folks, because it's beyond knowing who you are, it's about knowing whose you are. And I was with my who's, I was with my people. And so when you are able to let some of that trauma go and heal from it, what it does is it opens up space for you to create more. And so some of that stagnancy I felt as a practitioner is because there was a lot of space, a lot of unreleased cortisol, right? Vagus nerve going crazy. And because I was able to release some of that, I was able to birth some new projects from that experience. There were some readings that Dr. B and Dr. T had us dive into, reading The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, reading Dr. Fania Davis's little book, Race and Restorative Justice. And if from this class, I designed what's called the Sankofa Reconciliation Project. And based on this concept of storytelling that Dr. T and Dr. B modeled perfectly for us. And so in the Sankofa Reconciliation Project, I bring Black and Brown people in circle with white practitioners and take them through a journey of truth telling, of white participants witnessing the wound, because that's another thing. We have to address where the harm started. We have to have the conversation about structural racism. And so in these conversations, I bring Black and Brown people and white people together, and we have the cross-racial dialogue. White participants are witnessing the wound. White participants go off with my white co-facilitator and they go through unmasking whiteness, and they prepare to come back into a reconciliation process where they don't operate in the white supremacy. And brown participants come with me and we go through an embodiment practice, because I'm also a breathwork facilitator. We go through breathing, we go through grieving as we're sharing our stories, and singing and drumming and dancing. And are getting prepared for that reconciliation circle. And then the participants come together and we actually have that amends circle where white participants just listen and honor the dignity of Black and Brown bodies in the room. And then we have another circle where white participants name their complicity in racism. And they talk about the ways in which they've been complicit and the ways they've caused harm. And they talk about their allyship and the commitment that they're going to make to move forward and be better. And then we come together as a collective to create a piece of art. And so I just rolled this practice out this year, been able to go present at 2 conferences doing mini versions of this. Recently just got the stamp of approval from Dr. Fania Davis, who sat in one of these Sankofa circles. And I was able to talk about this experience that I had at SPI, Summer Peace Building Institute, with Dr. B and Dr. T. So it was wonderful to bridge that. And then have a longer period, have a group, a cohort of 12 participants who I'm taking on this journey throughout the entire year, where they get that full, deep experience. And so I wanted to share all that because this is what this brings forward. Another thing is I was able to complete a poetry book about poems that
Toy,
reflected my journey in Africa as at the ending of this program. And so the benefit of doing it in this way was that it created a liberated space, a decolonized space for me to heal, open up space, and then create as a practitioner. So thank you so much.
thank you so much. You shared so much. rich information. And I wanted to use that as a springboard to open up the space for comments from participants, any questions. So I'll turn it back over to Demonte to facilitate the next phase of our conversation.
Yeah, thank you all so much for all of the wisdom and brilliance that you shared with us during this session. And again, as a classmate of Toya in the class, for what you offered us during this summer. And so again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And so much gratitude to the conversation that's happening in the chat, folks that are pulling out impactful quotes. So definitely go through and read those things that are coming up. Something that I had a question around. Elder Olufemi really gave us a great overview of the historical harms, the historical gun violence. And oftentimes, I think we think about restorative justice practices, rightfully so, as attending to interpersonal instances of harm, so like micro scale instances of harm. But I'm curious if any of you sort of have a vision of how restorative justice might be able to attend to sort of these larger historical, systemic, structural harms that have resulted from gun violence, or that have resulted in gun violence. How can restorative justice play a role in attending to even those larger scale harms, not just the harms that happen between individuals? Because again, as you all spelled out, gun violence isn't just interpersonal violence. Curious if there's any thoughts there.
Dr. T?
Wait.
We heard
Shoot.
you, but we can hear you now. We can hear you now.
Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, I don't, I first of all, the principle of Ubuntu, I am because we are, right? That we all are connected to somebody and something. We are not alone. And the structure of white supremacy focuses on the individualism, right? And so basically me and mine are okay, so then I'm okay. Like, people don't think about that gun violence is affecting them if they don't have an immediate intersection with it, and they don't understand that it is affecting them in the broader scope of the community in which they live, and that it's something that if we are living together, we have to devise a way to do that. We have to devise a way to do that. And restorative justice and the practices and indigenous African practices, I say African communities are the most embracing communities that I've ever experienced in my life. That it's part of the practice, not to say that if someone is disruptive that they're not set aside, but they're not eliminated. They might be set aside momentarily so that they can be dealt with, so that the problem can be interrogated, so that then they can be restored, so that then they can still benefit from being a part of the we, and that they are not indefinitely set, and in the Western cultural continuum that is created and birthed in the cauldron of white supremacist thought, thinking, etc., practice, the idea of punishment and punitive and ostracizing and separating is I think it's a pathology, and it continues to sicken the culture and sicken the people rather than work on focusing on healing and transformation and transformative practices, and then restorative practices. That the individual has to be has to be transformed. They have to be heard, and they have to be whatever it is that has caused the harm in them that then causes them to harm, right, has to be addressed. And it's all systemic. And I don't understand why we as a culture don't understand that it's all interconnected, it's all systemic, and that nothing happens just apart by itself. And when people are in denial of that, when people reject that as a truth, we're talking about radical transparency, authenticity, all of that. When people push that away and reject it, they continue to stir the cauldron of sickness, of disease, of dis-ease, both individually, physically, and communally. So I don't know that that answered your question, DeMonte, but that's what I think of.
That was great.
Yeah, and again, I think Dr. T, really, put it down. And again, we're looking at how we're going to effectively use these pedagogies in a larger, broader context. We gotta really analyze the larger context and look at the political nature of school divisions that I'm in right now, and the academy and the so-called justice system, and what that is based upon, as Dr. T was talking about. So essentially, we're seeing a war of culture, of the European culture versus those of the indigenous people or African people. And again, I'm a history cat. I'm a social worker, but my first love is history. And what I tell people all the time, we're looking at jail or dungeons. African people did not know anything about a dungeon or jails until they came into contact with Europeans. Mm-hmm. There weren't any jails in Ghana or Nigeria or Niger. There was no need to have that.
No.
Or the first dungeons were introduced by the European conquerors, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, and the English. So really what we've got to do with that, and that's a very important fact, because in these young brothers' minds, when we're talking to them, they expect to go to jail. Mm-hmm. And then their behaviors kind of support that. So we got to let them know, hey, little brother, your ancestors knew nothing about jail until they were enslaved. Mm-hmm. And then these micro, macro, and meso attacks that come at us every day makes jail a possibility. I've taught some of my cousins that when they came out of the joint, they said, hey, man, that's the first time I really had time to think. So you had to be locked up in order for you to think? Mm-hmm. Because, again, these micro, macro, and meso attacks come at us on a daily basis in America, whether you're 5 years of age or you're 75. Mm-hmm. So these attacks, these systems are so diabolical that they affect our very reality of how we look at everything around us. True. And so now how we interface with the larger system is that we got to analyze the larger systems, because most of us don't have the analysis of it. So if we're going to maneuver with these systems, we got to know what we're up against, first of all. And then when we're looking at people of African descent, we got to now be able to take a look at the justice, restorative justice as an African construct, where we have rights of passage from birth to eldership to the ancestor world, where we have a council of elders, where we have the priests, the babalawos, the akonfos, the hooligans, where we're putting together an authentic Africanized process that is going to reawaken our ancestral DNA and our collective ancestor memory.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not incorporating culture and the ancestors and the elders and the Egungun, the Orisha, the Abosum, the Lord, the Neter, and all those universal forces that have never left us, then we're just kind of maneuvering in a colonized space.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
want to create liberated zones
Yes.
for
Yeah.
our people.
So I would just add to what Dr. T and Olufemi said in terms of restorative justice on a macro scale, on a larger scale, as they both talk about culture and they both talk about traditions and they both talk about the interactions of people on a humanistic level. The creation of restorative justice in a Western context is sort of the result of these disparities, these injustices, the deconstruction of families that produce the sort of these root causes of the disparities that we see, like in the educational system, where certain groups of students are disproportionately disciplined and punished, and that creates a need for something that we call restorative justice, or in the community or societal level, where we see um, almost an unfathomable um, rise in incarceration rates that disproportionately affect Black and Brown communities, based on these racialized policies, this disproportionality in terms, or inequities in terms of how um, these communities are treated, that then again creates the need for restorative justice practices in the criminal legal system. So I think what they're saying is that we have to, and Toy also mentioned that we have to decolonize restorative justice, and understand that some of the basic reasons why we have to have these systems of restorative justice are coming out of a societal structure, or a socio-ecological structure. In other words, levels. There are levels to it, from the individual to the family to the community to the society. But it's really coming out of a framework that has been designed to create these levels, or this hierarchy of human value based on your income, based on the color of your skin, based on your gender preferences, based on your sexual preferences, based on whatever's different from what has been institutionalized in the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, which we're in this whole year of celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, without really critically analyzing the impact that it's had on this country as a whole, but just really accepting that, okay, this is something that we should do, without understanding how does that document affect policies and practices that create where we are today, and create who's being adversely affected today. So I think that one of the things that's happening in terms of the national perspective on RJ through the National Association of Community and Restorative Justice is that we are reevaluating, we're reimagining our approach to restorative justice on these different levels. And we will see, as we did it in a previous conference in DC in 2024, that this upcoming conference is going to be a cauldron, so to speak, or a crucible to really distill how restorative justice moves forward, because it's the largest gathering of restorative justice practitioners on the planet, and folks are coming, I feel, with a thirst for, like, how do we apply these concepts, these principles, these practices to these multifaceted needs in the community, not just these sort of prescribed ways of dealing with restorative justice. And it requires us to tap into these indigenous practices more than just what do you call it, in a performative way, but in a pedagogy that impels us to act, to transform our interpretations, our practices, and the reach that restorative justice can have.
Thank you so much for attending to that question. Before I move to the next question, I just want to make sure no other thoughts around that question. All right. We have a question. I'll pop it on screen. What were some of the barriers you encountered when implementing this work? So when implementing this work of restorative justice and community healing as a response to gun violence, especially in the different places that you're doing the work. Maybe you can give us some of the landscape of where you're doing the work in Richmond, Virginia. What is the appetite for the work there? I would personally be sort of curious about that. And yeah, what are some of the barriers, even in doing this work in schools or with young people? Yeah, however you interpret that.
Why don't we turn that over to Kieran and Toya before Dr. T, Olufemi, and I add our insights. Kieran, Toya.
I was going to say Toya.
I'm like, you go ahead first, sis.
Some of the barriers, I think, with being a project manager for Drums No Guns, with the project that we're implementing at MLK Middle School, I mean, I think some of the barriers are relationships, being in relationship with each other, and just being honest with what we are as a practitioner, being honest with what is required, what's the responsibility of tending to our own harm within ourselves. That's just within the work, that's where I'm landing in my body as a practitioner and showing up at MLK, and both the role of project manager and practitioner and building relationship with students, staff, building the rapport there. We've been doing this work at MLK for about 3 or 4 years now, and I mean, I just think that one of the biggest barriers is carrying that responsibility of really honing in on this work, truth telling, and being honest with ourselves as practitioners, and being in relationship with students and in the communities that we're showing up in.
Yeah, beautiful. I agree, and I'd say two barriers that I've encountered. One is just self. I think, as practitioners and leaders in the work, um, it is easy to teach it. We get the concept, the theory. It's Sankofa. It calls to us. I do think we still always have to remind ourselves to remember. So when we are addressing these spaces with truth telling, I've even found with myself, like, I want to make sure that I'm not stripping anyone else's dignity away while I'm trying to protect my own. And how would my ancestors handle this? And so that within itself can be a barrier, and having to continue to unmask and strengthen ourselves and really embody the practice so that it has integrity. And then I'd say the other thing is that lack of diversity with Black and Brown practitioners being at the table in these spaces. I found, as someone who's advocated for restorative justice response policy in our state, And now we have the response policy for all the school districts, that it can be very cookie cutter. But then being a Board of Education member in my town, I was able to amend language that specifically addresses Black and Brown students and the needs and addressing that racial disparity. But without me there, without having a Black person there to speak up in that way and amend that language, and then hold the board and the administration accountable to following that and being committed to anti-racism, it'll just be another policy adopted under a structurally racist system. And so I think just having that lack of diversity with us at the table, being in charge and holding that space of accountability can be a huge barrier.
Dr. Tia Olufemi, what are some of the barriers that we've encountered or that you've encountered?
There's a lot of them. There's definitely a lot of them, but I'll just talk about a couple, kind of jumping off of what Toya said and what Kiran shared. Toya said something about language, right? So colonized language and colonized minds, that oftentimes when we are coming into spaces to do the work, there is an expectation of what the work's going to be, right? And because it's just, the language is so confining. The language is so confining, and it is a full body immersion experience. And so it's kind of like you can't talk about it until you experience it, right? And so people are kind of wanting you to tell them in advance what it's going to be and what are going to be the outcomes, right? When you're leaning on the ancestors, I lean on the ancestors and what they are saying. And I said, and they survived way more than we have survived with way less resources than we have. And so I want to know, how did they do that? And so I'm always Sankofa, going back, and who I bring to the table are them. I bring them and their wisdom and what I have learned through them. The idea of those false expectations, like you're going to do a workshop in restorative justice and then everything's going to be fine. People, like when we come into the workshop space, we have to let the people know this is called a workshop. So there is work that has to be done. It's not about the expectation in these conference spaces and whatnot, where they expect you to get there and tell them the answers, right? And tell them the solution, present the problem, and here's the solution. It's not like that. We are working together. This is a collaborative process. We are laboring together, and teaching those principles of community interdependence that people are not used to. And so it feels very uncomfortable to them sometimes. It feels very much radical transparency is like pulling Band-Aids off. Like it hurts sometimes. And I think that for me, two strategies that I often use is I take my glasses off so that I can't see their faces when I'm telling them the truth. Because I don't want their faces to influence how I tell them. Because I need to tell them the truth radically, because we are in radical trouble and we need radical solutions to the radical trouble that we're in. And I can't be, I don't want to be swayed by, I'm trying to be, so people start crying. I can't allow their tears to disrupt or interrupt what I'm attempting. Yes, you're crying. You need to cry. There's a cleansing. It's part of the transformative process. It's part of accountability. It's part of recognition. It's part of truth telling. And so sometimes, Toya said, we can be the problem. Yeah. So that's why I have strategies for myself so that I'm not the barrier. that I'm not creating the barrier. I want to clear the way, because, like we've been saying, what it is about is creating liberation, a liberated space, a liberated space. And people aren't used to that. It's very scary. It's very scary for people. They like those, it's like how babies like being, what do they call that? The bunting, how you bind them up, because that's how they've been used to being in the womb, right? So it's a little uncomfortable having to come out of that space. And I find that, that I have to always speak to myself all the time. Just speak the truth. Just speak the truth. Speak the truth. So that's a barrier. That's what I have to say.
Shep, so there's a question for you in the comments. You see it?
Yeah, so I'll read it out loud.
Okay, thanks, Demonte.
Yeah, directed towards Elder Olufemi, but would love to hear from any or all of you on this. Can you please speak more to cultural identity and how we can invite students to shift from identifying with glamorized violence and drug lifestyle we see portrayed in music and media, and help them instead to connect with other aspects of their identity, such as ancestral culture, which you referred to before?
Yeah, that's a powerful commentary question there. Well, that's a process that we are engaged in every day with young kings and young queens, because we hear the kids inside the building calling us the niggas every day, nigga this, nigga that. The music is reinforcing that, and then there's no real perspective, on our homeland. So we're starting with enslavement, and then working our way up here. So what we do with Young Kings is that we start that lesson up pretty much on a weekly or monthly basis of having identified, first of all, being Black. We haven't even gotten to the continent of Africa yet, and being a Black man or a young Black boy in America, and the ramifications of being Black. Well, how is your life as a young brother in Creighton Court? Well, what are you up against? I'm not from Creighton, but what are we collectively up against as Black men or Black people? So that type of conversation now is facilitating a very high level politicized conversation. And they're very clear, and they know already in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade what America has planned for them. All right. Then from there, now we're looking at, last week we're doing a lesson on images. We're looking at the minstrel show images, the Black characters, and looking at that up on my board, my screen here in my room, to now looking at men like Martin Delaney, Frederick Douglass, or Pianki, or Shabaka, or Tetamani from the 25th dynasty, or back in ancient Kush. So then now we are having those lessons on our men and that male and that proper male image, not just here in America, but going way back to Kush, which was the parent civilization of the world. So I guess you can see where I'm going with this. But now that language has got to be consistent. It's got to be on a daily basis. We drum. We starting our African drum and dance up here shortly, drumming on the buckets. So then now we have the physical manifestations of art and the expressive nature of art to now actualize their identity as being Africans here in America. All right. So it's a full process that there's no one activity or no one conversation. This is an ongoing dialogue to silence the N-word and to reawaken the African.
Yeah, let me build on that. So we also design spaces that amplify the message. So one of the things that we've incorporated in this year's project is doing this online training with all the mental health team at the school and healing-centered engagement, which is a culturally rooted approach that moves the paradigm from trauma-informed to healing-centered, which changes the perspective from looking at the individual to looking at the collective. So the entire mental health team at MLK is going through this healing-centered engagement training that was developed by Dr. Sean Ginwright from Flourish Agenda. So that's one piece. So there becomes sort of a collective framework and a collective language in terms of how the mental health team is looking at and analyzing the traumatic responses of our young people. We also base it on an urban trauma framework where we focus on the historical, environmental, and biological aspects of trauma based on the impact of racism in society. So that's one thing. Another thing is that we have expanded, or we're expanding or reactivating our yoga and mindfulness program, which Kiran was talking about, that helps our young people know that they have a sacred, safe space where they can balance out some of the issues that are triggering their nervous system. It's called the Sankofa Mindfulness Room. And the images that we have in that room are a reflection of this idea that we believe in called massive resilience. So the mural that's in that room they're really mandalas, has mandalas in that room that convey this peaceful, healing energy. We also have a restorative urban garden space, an urban garden, school community garden. And one of the things that we are building in the garden is called the Ubuntu Memorial Labyrinth. So we're creating a labyrinth, which is a 24/7 physical space where people are invited to come and do walking meditations, hopefully to help them transform emotions like anger into more thoughtful, peaceful responses. And then they're also growing, using that flower therapy that Kieran was talking about, and growing food and integrating science, technology, engineering, and math with restorative justice. And then the other piece is something that we have a Sawubona rhythm lab, which is really kind of the basis for Shepsu talked about. We use 5-gallon buckets, like in Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk, or what sometimes you might see street performers using the buckets. But we also incorporate traditional African drum and dance, world percussion, rhythms, and movement from around the African diaspora. And the idea behind that is to develop a arts-based, youth-centered public health campaign where the youth are using their own research from their own communities and transforming it in a way where they can communicate it using an innovative arts-based approach to educate the community, not just about what their problems are, but also what their visions are, so that it's a type of technology that we demonstrated at the last NCCRJ conference in Washington, D.C., the National Association for Community and Restorative Justice. It's like using rhythms for freedom. It's a declaration of liberation. It's empowering young people to be able to speak to what is happening to them using their own voice, and not the sort of biased solutions that are prescribed by folks that might not even live in their community, that folks that aren't going through the day-to-day experiences that they're going through. So it's like this ideology of Susu, Sankofa, Ubuntu, Sawubona, and Uhuru. So Sankofa means to go back and fetch it. It's really like tapping into our ancestral intelligence to look at what we're going through now so that we can present and produce an Afro futuristic vision that is beneficial not only to our communities, but the entire world. And then Ubuntu is our knowledge and belief in the interconnectedness of all of us, that I am because we are. So that really just promotes the belief and respect and dignity, that every human being has inherent dignity. And then that's expressed through Sawubona, which is that you are more than your worst mistake. You are more than the trauma that you are have experienced. Like, you're more than your ACEs score. You're more than the trauma that you experience in K through 12 education or in your home or in your community. That we're wrapping around you because we see that spirit, we see that lineage in you. And then Uhuru is, like we've always been, committed to freedom, our freedom and the freedom of all people to be who they are. Enslavement was a blip in our historical narrative. We're not defined by slavery. And we acknowledge that even during slavery, we have a chronology. We have a history of resistance. We have a history of resilience. We have a history of survival. We have a history of thriving. We have shown the world that we are the originators of this idea of restorative justice, and that we will continue to practice it, preach it, teach it, share it, spread it. And that one of the biggest issues that, among others, that we are confronting is this gun violence epidemic in our communities, because for decades, we've witnessed thousands of our young people, thousands of people not losing, but being killed by gun violence. And we see the constant rise in mass shootings, suicides, school shootings, interpartner violence. And we're dissatisfied, disappointed, distraught, and disgusted with the lack of common sense approaches to resolving this public health problem. Like, there are geniuses in this country, geniuses around the world, but there are just too many obstacles to healing gun violence. And that's what we're all about with this class. Gun violence, restorative justice, and community healing. And the work that we're doing at MLK, we believe, can be replicated in other schools in Richmond, other communities, other cities. And our whole motive is to just connect, collaborate, to coordinate with other people, to organize. Like Malcolm said, we're not outnumbered, we're out organized, and to do this work collectively together to create change in our society and around the world.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. B, Dr. T, Elder Olufemi, Kieran, Toya. Thank you so much for being in this space with us, sharing your wisdom. We have just maybe 1 minute. Could we do a quick whip around just of how people can get connected to your work, or any last minute things you want to share? Maybe starting with you, Dr. B.
Well, you can definitely follow us on Instagram, Drums No Guns Foundation, the Conciliation Project. You can follow us on Facebook. You can also email us at drumsnogunsfoundation@gmail.com. You can, well, probably too late to take the class this weekend, right, Toya? But you could just stay in touch with the Zare Institute, because they'll have information about when Dr. T and I offer the class again. And you can definitely come to the National Conference for Community and Restorative Justice in July 7th through the 10th in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I'll pass it over. Well, go ahead, DeMonte. Who do you want to go next?
Yeah, Dr. T.
All right. Yeah, so all of that, and also I would say, when African writers and creatives talk about understanding, they use the word apprehension, right? And so it's a full body thing. Apprehension is something that that you do and you feel and you hold, and it becomes part of you. So I encourage people to begin to interrogate, begin to interrogate and learn about. There's so much out there about restorative justice, restorative practices. I'm sure that we've said some words and maybe even expressed some theories that people don't really understand, that are sort of making their brain, what is that? I never heard that word before. I never heard of sawabona. I never heard of Ubuntu. But these things are fundamental. They are foundationally structural to any kind of restorative practice and any type of community building. So I would say, educate yourself, because there is knowledge to be had, and you need to be the one to be the initiator of unmasking and taking the scales off your eyes, because if you don't do it, it won't get done. So that's what
Thank you.
Mhm.
It's all for me.
Yeah, I think it's like what the sister was saying. Knowledge is power, and within that particular perspective, culture is the foundation for our knowledge, or for our ancestral intelligence and technology. So, and I would encourage everyone on this call to get in contact with your ancestral roots. Start looking at other healing methodologies outside of this Western clinical perspective that we have been so indoctrinated in, and also look at the healing power of just what was done on this side of the water by our indigenous brothers and sisters, and how they healed their wounds, how they came together to deal with all sorts of traumas, and in that perspective, develop a methodology from healing from what has already been done and what's been tried and true. Medasi.
Thank you so much. Kiran?
I will just leave you with this reminder that liberation isn't something that we achieve, it's something that we practice together. And just taking this moment to honor those ancestors who carried the responsibility so that our whose bodies carried responsibility so that our nervous systems, so that we can build nervous systems for more joy, more space for ease, more space for truth telling, more space for love, more space for liberation.
Thank you
Ashe.
so much. And last but not least, Toya.
Yeah, I just say for all my Black and Brown folks to really engage in your own healing from trauma and internalized oppression and racism, and think about the ways in which you or we might be perpetuating systemic racism. And for our white brothers and sisters to also do that research, because we all come from an indigenous community. And I think when white people can also Sankofa, and by the way, learning that term, to go back to your ancestor, it's translated in a lot of different communities and languages. There are different phrases for that in German, in Hebrew, in Arabic, in Irish Gaelic, in Wales, in Welsh, all of that. And so there's a connection to that in us as humans. So I definitely encourage folks to go back and find that. And then for I'm dropping my website here for folks to sign up and get subscribed to everything I've got going. And then lastly, if you are a student at Eastern Mennonite University, there'll be a call out soon for participants, because I did get a DEI grant there to do a Sankofa Reconciliation Weekend retreat, to include staff and students in that process of cross-racial dialogue and healing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we are slightly over, so if you have to go, I completely understand. But I want to drop a little bit more information for you. We have 2 more great webinars coming up this month, one on environment and restorative justice with the authors of the Little Book of Environment and Restorative Justice. That will be next week, November 12th from 12 to 1:30 p.m. Eastern. And then on the following week after that, on November 20th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern, we have Becoming a Restorative Lawyer with Brenda Waugh, the author of Becoming a Restorative Lawyer, and Howard Zare. So wishing you all so much peace. Please join us. Also sign up for, please register for SPI in 2026 and go learn more about the Zare Institute at our website. Thank you so much.
DeMointe, we want to shout you out, brother, for your great work. Thank you for organizing this webinar today.
Thank you so much.
DeMointe.
Thank you.
Good job.
Take care.
Take care, everyone.
All right. Peace and blessings.
Peace and blessings, everyone.
Blessing.